Hi, I'm Anchor Pete, and I have a task for you. In the comments, can you please write if you are subscribed to the LaserCast channel? If you are, awesome. And if not, why don't you go click on over there right now by using this button right here. Go over there and subscribe. I made the LaserCast channel with my friends Chris and Danny so that we could do deep dive reviews of the horror movies that we love. And Danny and Chris are constantly putting out really cool 30-second reviews of the movies that they watch, and they're constantly watching movies. Just recently, we did a whole slew of videos where we were talking about Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, and then finally Bill and Ted Face the Music. First up, as part of our Horror Fam The Next Generation show, we have Danny and Charlotte with their review of Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey.
2 days, 2 Bill and Ted movies down. What'd you think of Bogus Journey?
I thought it was good. One bunny, one policeman, one granny. Terrifying.
Yeah, that's when they go to hell. What about the stations?
I thought it was good.
Good?
Hey, if you like 30-second reviews, then you are in the right place. Coming up next, we have Chris's 30-second review of Bill and Ted Face the Music.
As a lifelong Bill and Ted fan, I'm happy to say that my expectations were met.
On the LaserCast channel, you're going to have an episode dedicated to Bill and Ted Face the Music. After that, you're going to have an episode dedicated to the trailer for The Haunting of Bly Manor, which is another TV series that was created by Mike Flanagan. Coming up within the next 2 weeks, you're going to have on this channel another episode of Ramblings from the Rod Pod with me and my friend Brian. We're going to be talking about Transformers, War for Cybertron, Siege episodes 3 through 6. Also on this channel, you're going to have me and special guest Tyler E.C. Burnworth, and we're going to be talking about the first 2 trades of the comic book Invincible. But yeah, there's a lot of content. It's great if you could subscribe to both channels. If you're just going to stay here with Anchor Pete, well, guess what? I'm still going to put LaserCast episodes up on here. They're just going to be a little bit abbreviated. If you want the full episodes, I strongly recommend going over to the LaserCast channel. All right. So for this video, this is an abbreviated version of the LaserCast episode where we're talking about the 2016 home invasion horror movie, Hush. Once again, directed by Mike Flanagan. So put on your psycho killer masks, learn a little bit of sign language, and come join us. I'm gonna just jump right into this and tell people about Hush if they haven't seen it. It's basically a 2016 horror film which came out directly on Netflix, and it stars Kate Siegel, who plays Maddie, and Kate Siegel, for people who haven't been watching our show, she is Mike Flanagan's wife, and together they came up with the story together. She's the writer on the film as well, along with Mike Flanagan. And they, it's a home invasion story, and the two of them would practice the scenes together. They would kind of role play the scenario of this home invasion and to see if she would get killed or not in the scenario. So that was really intriguing. And the whole time I was watching this movie, I was just picturing Mike Flanagan and Kate Siegel role playing the whole thing. It's got an interesting cast. There's only 5 living characters in the movie that you actually see on screen. It was filmed in 18 days. It contains less than 15 minutes of dialogue in the whole movie. What do you guys think of the cast, first off, before we jump into anything?
You know Mike Flanagan's work. You know how talented Kate Siegel is. So
yeah,
and she carries this movie basically on her shoulders. So
absolutely. Yeah. This movie, like, it just hits the ground running 10 minutes in. The home invasion begins. And so, you know, it's kind of hard not to spoil this movie. If you're worried about spoilers, you should just stop the video now and come back after you've watched it. It's on Netflix. It's like, how long is it? It's like 80 minutes?
80 minutes.
Yeah. So watch that and come join us afterwards. Are you guys fans of Michael Trucco?
Oh, yeah. Battlestar Galactica.
That's right. That's right. And I was wondering, I was going to ask you guys, is like Flanagan connected to Battlestar Galactica in any way?
He's not that I know of, no, but it's weird. You go from Katie Sackhoff to Michael Trucco. Right. You know, and it's just like, oh, how can we get these two back together again?
Yeah, Samantha Sloyan, she plays Sarah in this movie, right? It says that she is Leigh Crane on Haunting of Hill House. So who's Leigh Crane?
Oh my God, that's Steven's wife.
The pregnant. She's not pregnant. She becomes
Yeah,
pregnant.
it's got to be, right? I can't think of who else it would be.
Here's where I know her from.
Go ahead.
I've watched years of Grey's Anatomy with my wife. And she is the one who kills McDreamy on Grey's Anatomy.
How does she kill him?
She's a doctor in this like kind of shitty hospital, and he's in this car crash. She's a doctor, and she messes up. Like he was in very bad shape, and he could have been saved, and she just didn't do the right procedure in like the moment that would have saved him. She ends up getting a job at Grey Sloan Hospital, and Meredith Grey has now the Lasser cast is a Grey's Anatomy podcast.
Grey's Anatomy starts with a G though, so maybe we should do a Grey's Anatomy podcast, right? John Gallagher, from what I know him from, he is the guy from Emmett. He's on 10 Cloverfield Lane. He's the other guy in the bunker in 10 Cloverfield Lane.
Do either of you watch The Newsroom?
No.
I think it was HBO with Jeff Daniels.
Well.
Aaron Sorkin?
Yeah.
Okay.
He was like Jeff Daniels' right-hand man in The Newsroom. And he was like such a likable character.
Okay.
John Gallagher Jr. plays like the guy that you kind of root for. And he's got like a romantic interest with one of the women in the newsroom, and it's like this cute little thing, and you really just genuinely root for him. So to go from that to this was jarring, to say the least.
It's like watching Jim from The Office, like slaughter people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
On IMDb, they have John Gallagher Jr. listed as the man. And then when you see him talk on Netflix with the captions, he's referred to as the intruder. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Mike Flanagan and Kate Siegel came up with the story while they were on a date together before they got married. So I thought that was interesting too.
And it was, and then I believe the rest of it was actually fleshed out at the Stanley Hotel, where which is where King based The Shining off of. They were staying at the Stanley Hotel.
Whoa!
And that's where they I believe they fleshed out the rest of the story at the bar at the Stanley. And while they were staying in room 217, which is the room that King stayed in, which is where the 217 is in the Shining novel. It's 237 in the Shining film.
Wow.
But yeah, they basically fleshed out the rest of the story while staying at the Stanley. And when they weren't doing that, Flanagan had said that he was in the hallways in the middle of the night with handfuls of candy, trying to lure ghost children, because that was all the lore that he had heard about the hotel.
Oh my God. They're like living the Stephen King dream, those two.
It takes a lot to go out on a date and talk about home invasion scenarios, because that could go very wrong. So, like, what are you thinking for an entree? And by the way, I think I can get you if I go through the bathroom window. Wait, what?
So, have you ever loaded a crossbow before?
Well, Chris, do you think you could take it on? Do you think you could summarize this movie, basically, this the product of their love?
I'll give it a shot. Thank God this one's pretty short and sweet without initially giving anything away. Right. So Kate Siegel plays Maddie. Maddie is from the city. I'm not sure what city, but now she lives in the woods. She's an author. We know she already has one book on the shelves, and she's currently working on a new book. And when she was 13 years old, she contracted a sort of meningitis. She had temporarily lost her hearing and her vocals, but she had surgery and wound up losing them for good. So she's been without hearing and without a voice since she was 13 years old. She has a neighbor not too far away, but other than that, she lives in the middle of nowhere. And one night someone comes a-knocking, and shit gets real.
Before we even get into like what happens, there's one thing that I've been thinking about. I just want to hear what you guys have to say. What's up with Black Mass?
Oh, Midnight Mass?
Is it Black Mass or Midnight Mass?
Midnight Mass.
Midnight Mass.
Midnight Mass. Okay, what is that?
Yeah. So Midnight Mass is basically, it's a story that Flanagan has kind of had rattling around his head for quite a few years now. When you watch that Collider interview, you know, and Stephen Weintraub from Collider brings up Easter eggs in Hush, and that's one of the first things they talk about, is that her book that's currently out is Midnight Mass. And they even go as far as to tell you that the story that Mike has had for years, like lines of dialogue and potential, you know, different plots and whatnot, they're actually pulling from Mike's story. So now Midnight Mass, you know, what is that was 2016. So now, you know, 4 or 5 years later, Midnight Mass is actually within the last 2 or 3 weeks in development. It's in production. They're making it. Kate's going to be in it.
Yeah.
And really don't, as far as I know, I don't think we know too much about it just yet. And we're not even really told that much about it in Hush. So as far as I know, I believe it's still something of a mystery.
Wow. Yeah, because you know what's interesting is that it says that Michael Trucco is one of the cast members. Like,
okay, great. Nice.
It gets right into the action right away with this movie. But within the first, like you guys said, I think 12 minutes, it sets up the whole rest of the movie. And it's so crucial. And so, like, Danny, what do you think is like so important about that setup in the first 12 minutes?
You have a central protagonist who's deaf, and they do such a good job right away with the sound design. Like, you know, like when you watch the Oscars and you hear the nominees for sound effects, editing, and sound mixing, and you're a layman, you don't really know what that is. Well, in this movie, you freaking get what sound mixing and sound editing are, because, like, she's cutting up vegetables in the kitchen, and she's preparing this meal. She's got, I think it's like lamb chops in the oven, and she's making risotto, and you're hearing the chopping, the sizzling. You're hearing these noises, and then it just mutes, and it's her chopping to a dull board, and you just stare at the frying pan, and you see the bubbles, but you don't hear anything. And it's such an effective way of putting you right into who this woman is, what her challenges are, and then, you know, how is she going to deal, you know, with what she's going to deal with later. But we as the audience, we fully get what her world is like just because of the sound design that this movie has right off the bat.
So, like Danny was speaking about the sound design, that all takes place right before Maddie's neighbor Sarah shows up. Now, you're supposed to assume that Sarah doesn't live too far away. She walks over and she's holding Sarah's book, Midnight Mass, and she's excited. She can't wait to talk to her about it. And you can tell she really loves Maddie because she's learning sign language just to be able to speak to her every day. And it's amazing that between Samantha Sloyan, her performance along with Flanagan's directing makes you care about this character that you really like, and you realize you're caring about her in the moment. Like, you're just kind of like, I like that. Like, I really like this person.
Yeah.
And it's very important that they do that, because she gets fucking brutalized not even 12 minutes into this film.
Yeah.
And I mean, it is, again, the importance, like Danny brought up, the importance of sound design. Maddie is in the kitchen throwing out her dinner at that point that's been ruined prior. And Sarah is just is outside her door, getting brutalized, just tortured, stabbed, beaten outside her door. Maddie has no idea this is going on, and it's breaking your heart. And you're looking at the time and you're like, I am no more than 12 minutes invested in this. And it is crushing me that this woman is getting just brutalized right now.
Yeah.
You know, and again, that speaks to her acting, and it speaks to Flanagan's directing.
Counted. I think he stabs her 13 times in the gut.
Oh my God.
And I only counted. I didn't count because I was like enjoying it. I counted because I had just watched the Collider interview, and he talks in there about how he always felt that, like, stabbing in movies, that it was always portrayed so badly, where, like, you'd slash somebody's throat and they just hit the floor and be dead. And he's like, no, people have time to die slowly. And then, like, you watch that scene and and again, the sound, like, just the knife going in. It's just.
You were getting very you were getting very close to becoming the guy I had behind me during Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. Where he was just like, in the theater, who was just like, yeah, stab her. Yeah.
Oh my
Stab
God.
her again.
I
Yeah. To the point where I turn around, I'm like,
Yeah.
my now brother-in-law is like, what's going on down there? I'm like, I don't know.
her death is definitely it's on the short list of the most brutal deaths for characters that you care about. Like,
Yeah.
because you have to like sit there and actually watch and hear what's happening, and Maddie is just in the background throwing the food out because she burned it. Yeah, and that's another thing. She has those flashing lights that the lights they flash so much that they cause vibration, and it allows her to not see the flashing light but also to feel it.
Yeah.
And that comes into play later also.
Yeah.
And Flanagan setting up objects in the house, things that we will see in the third act, maybe sooner, that I won't bring up now. But you watch this movie and you say to yourself, as much as I would have loved to have seen this in a theater, when you really sit down and think about it, and it pains me to say it, this movie would have been lost on a general audience. It's home at Netflix, and which in time has proven to have been the best place for it. It really was perfect.
Yeah.
This movie just had a slow roll and just caught on. It's such an incredible slasher film, but I don't think it's a slasher film for general audiences, because you can see when you watch it where had a big studio got involved, they would have changed so many things.
Interesting. Well, so going along with that note and what you guys are talking about in general, one aspect that I like that they set up in this part as well was her own thought process. Because there's a few, for writing, exactly. So there's a few things. When she's talking with Sarah says, do you hear a voice when you're writing, like when your characters talk? And then Maddie says that she hears her mother's voice, right? So then you think that when she hears a voice speaking to herself, that's her mom's voice, right? And we know it's Kate Siegel's voice because we've heard her talk before. I'm a writer, haven't written much, but this one scene in the beginning when she's writing her novel and she's going through kind of a little bit of writer's block, that was that scene really spoke to me. And it's interesting because that scene itself sets up the conclusion of the film too, perfectly. That scene, she's running through all the different possible endings of her novel, and she's weighing out, well, would this work? Would this work? And she literally has different conclusions that she's written, and she's trying to see which one works best. And I love that scene. That's one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie. It's
at that point that we're introduced, that she's introduced to the killer. He kills Sarah, and then he starts toying with her. He comes in, and he's in the house. Again, and it's one of those things, I'm sitting there, I love Flanagan, I love this film, and if it wasn't so, and I am not a nitpicker by any means, but you watch something enough times and you go, okay, because again, you're dealing with someone with an impairment. You're dealing with someone who, there have been plenty of slasher films, horror films where someone's been blind. So, Wait Until Dark was a big inspiration for this, according to Kate Siegel. Is that Wait Until Dark with Audrey Hepburn?
And Alan Arkin.
And Alan Arkin, yeah. And so you're sitting there and you're trying to imagine, and again, with the great sound design, and you're like, all right, well, how would she not catch this out of her peripheral vision? And well, how would she not feel the breeze from the outside? You can't help but think about those things, but in the same moment, there's so many other, it's so expertly crafted that it's like, I'm acknowledging these things, but I don't even care because I'm enjoying the hell out of everything else.
Pete, you mentioned she has a cat, and she keeps leaving the door open because the cat has free reign to go out and come back.
Right.
So she even gets up and puts on a sweatshirt because she's cold in the living room. And that's when when she gets up and she sees the killer, they're both standing and the open door is there.
Oh,
and
yeah.
you get the feeling right away because he basically walks in with the knife and the movie could be 14 minutes long, and that could be the end. And he realizes already, because he had killed Sarah up against the glass and he's tapping on the glass, he basically knows that she's deaf. And he makes the conscious decision, I'm going to play with her.
Yeah.
And it's like literal cat and mouse. I'm going to toy with this woman. I think he actually says the phrase, we'll have fun.
Yeah.
Like,
there's a line in this that every time I watch it, from the first time I saw it, and I'm like, what a fantastic line. So he comes in initially, she doesn't know he's there, he takes her phone, and then he goes outside and he starts sending her pictures of herself, and she's receiving them on her laptop.
Yeah.
It's such a great gag. It's fantastic, right?
Yeah.
So now she knows he's there. And again, I'm getting goosebumps because it's such a terrific, and I remember horror fans at the time complaining like, I can't believe he took the mask off so early. This isn't Michael Myers. This isn't Jason. This is a man. He probably works at the convenience store in town. This is a man. And how else do you, like, he takes the mask off and now it doesn't say this, but it's basically him telling her like, oh, you thought you were going to survive this? You thought you had a chance? It's over. And he says to her, this line, I imagine this line on a Scream Factory Blu-ray with beautiful original cover art. I imagine the line at the bottom, and it says, when you wish you were dead, that's when I'll come inside. It's such a terrific line.
Yeah.
And if you knew John Gallagher Jr. from Newsroom, and we're talking 4 years ago, back in 2016, I don't think I had seen 10 Cloverfield Lane when this movie came out, but he takes the mask off, and I didn't know that he was in this movie. So he takes the mask off, and I'm like, Newsroom?
Yeah, yeah.
And then he says that line, and you're just like, and he has this like robotic, methodical style of walking where it's like he's not in a rush. He gives like this weird look where like he looks in one direction and then just kind of like turns the other. It's so creepy. Like, he's not Michael Myers, but he definitely has the vibe of like one of the old established serial killer from movies.
His slasher is either a void, like The Shape, or like Jason. He's this eyeless, soulless, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And then there's the intruder, the man.
What Chris said about him, he's just like a guy who probably works at the convenience store. There's this great scene later in the movie where he meets Sarah's boyfriend, and Sarah's boyfriend is a big freaking guy. And in that scene, it's one of the first scenes of dialogue in a long time, in about a 20-minute span.
Yeah.
Where characters are having a conversation. And he says, he says, I wasn't going to win that fight. I only had about a 2 out of 10.
Oh, yeah.
He's not Michael Myers. He's not only is he a guy, he's a small guy. He's a guy who carries a crossbow because he might have to kill you from a distance because, you might be able to kick his ass.
But at one point in the film, you see notches on the crossbow, right? So that's a little bit of backstory. You're like, people, animals, what could it be? And also, when he's having that scene with the neighbor, John, he's constantly referring to him as a big guy. And he's talking about linebackers. Right. And you're like, picked on in high school, like bullied in high school, like and that's as little of a backstory as you get. And what I was saying earlier about like this being small budget versus like a big studio horror film, if this were a big studio horror film, you would have had, a scene prior, cut in with the scenes of Sarah and Maddie, where he was at a convenience store and maybe all you saw was his hands and maybe he killed the guy behind the counter. They would have, no, this guy appears out of nowhere. That's the thing that's amazing about this film. If you went into it knowing nothing and you're like, oh, so here's a deaf mute woman. She's an author. Oh, she has a nice neighbor. Holy shit, there's a killer in this? Like you wouldn't have known. You wouldn't have known. He steps in the frame and just starts, you're like, if you didn't know anything about it, you would have been shocked.
Flanagan makes his mark in movies by subverting expectations. You know, like another thing like that, if this was a bigger budget movie, there would have been a 5 to 7 minute flashback dealing with Maddie's hearing loss. They take what could be a long, drawn-out exposition scene, and they literally, when Sarah gives the book back to Maddie puts the book down, and the camera lingers for maybe 5 seconds on the book jacket that gives her little bio. And in that little bio, it mentions how she lost her hearing at the age of 13 to meningitis. And that's all you get. And if you're not paying attention, you don't get that.
Flanagan does give you another opportunity, which I also thought was very clever, because I love the initial, it's just a blurb, and if you miss it, you're screwed until the middle of the film when John and the killer are having that conversation. And then very briefly, he doesn't, for the dialogue, he doesn't smother you and explaining it to you. He just, John's like, oh, yeah, I think she had meningitis when she was a kid, or something like that. Just like very briefly, like, oh yeah, I think I saw that earlier in the film.
What do we end up from watching a whole movie? What do we know about this killer based on what we've seen?
We know that he's possibly done this before. We don't know to what degree. We don't know if it's like, you see the notches on the crossbow, but it could be animals, could be, he's clearly, I mean, you get, watching and you're like, he has experience hunting, he loads a crossbow with ease to a degree. Even comments to her at one point, like, not that easy, is it? But again, if this were, like I said, if it were a big studio film, they would have cut in those scenes with her and Sarah, would have cut him into that somehow in another location. And you realize watching this that it's so unnecessary. And it's so much more effective when he literally comes out of nowhere.
Yeah. I think that's done very intentionally because, he's a really great killer. He's a great serial killer for a single movie. But, I think of like the classic serial killers in horror movies. The movies are about them. Like Nightmare on Elm Street, the opening scene of Nightmare on Elm Street is literally the unseen Freddy Krueger building his glove. That's the opening scene with the credits rolling. The opening of Halloween, of course, it's the long, tracking shot through the house and Michael murders his sister. This movie is about Matt. So we don't need to know all these things about who this guy is, the man, the intruder.
We were getting an idea of how messed up this guy is because he's using Sarah's corpse to knock on the window to taunt Maddie.
Yeah.
And then either before or after that, another thing I love about Flanagan, within that first 12 minutes, there's an odd shot of Sarah putting her phone in her back pocket. And you're like, that's not like Flanagan to like, it almost seems like you could mistake it for a gratuitous shot.
Yeah.
And a butt shot. Yeah. And then we go back to that and you're like, oh, the phone, Maddie's going for the phone in her back pocket. You're like, no, Flanagan,
I was kind of curious as to why she lived alone. Because even though this movie does a great job of telling you so much with visual clues, I felt like I couldn't tell why she was living by herself.
Well, early in the film, before Sarah gets there, she has that like very brief scene where she gets a text from an ex-boyfriend and then she FaceTimes him and then cancels it and then like he tries to call. So, and then her sister mentions something about how that was a year ago that they broke up. So it could have had, like, again, we don't know. It could have been the bad breakup with the boyfriend and then she decided to move out and go her way. It could just be that, she's a writer and she wanted to be alone to write.
Her sister said that she chose, like, oh, you chose isolation. She's like, no, she says, I'm not even going to pantomime sign language. I know, no, but she says isolation chose me.
So throughout our discussion, we keep talking about how there's things that set up other things. And you guys talk about items, setting up items. So at one point, and I knew this was going to come into play, the killer, to taunt Maddie, takes like a charm, or is it like a necklace off of Sarah, right?
Mm-hmm.
He like
Earring.
takes a heart charm or whatever from her, and he like kind of dangles it in front of her to kind of taunt her. And we know that comes into play later. Sarah's boyfriend John comes looking for her, and the killer finds him outside, and the killer comes up on him with a flashlight and pretends that he's a cop, and he's trying to keep this facade going that he's a cop, and he has an excuse for every little weird detail, like why he doesn't have a badge, why he doesn't have a gun. And at one point he accidentally drops that locket or the charm, and then the boyfriend is on to him, you know? And it's just like, it's just like that. And like with the cell phone you mentioned before in the pocket, you know, everything is getting set up for later action.
That scene is so great, and it's so tragic because John, even without the charm, John is kind of onto him almost immediately.
Yeah.
And we've established already, John is a big guy, and he is ready to basically end this movie. Like, he's got the, like, he 100% lies. He says that, oh, Maddie has a spare key under that rock down there. He picks up a rock. He's moving towards him. He's going to get the jump on him. And then Maddie, like, thinking that she's warning him, bangs on the door. And in that momentary distraction, he gets stabbed in the neck and just starts squirting blood. And you're like, oh, such a great, tragic moment.
One of the things I liked about the movie so much too is that he's bleeding, he's on the ground, you think he's dead, and you're thinking this is awful, but then he gets up and tackles the man, and then he's choking him on the ground, and it almost looks like he could kill him, but he just doesn't have enough in him.
I think it's just before that the Maddie gets the crossbow, right? He's climbing up. Was it? That's another thing too. You're watching her at some, you know, setting it up. She is still figuring out how she's going to get out of this. At one point, she climbs out onto the roof, and you're sitting there, and you're like, you can't hear the creaking. We're all hearing the creaking. What are you thinking? You know. So basically, she takes a flashlight, throws it into the woods. That distracts the killer. She starts to try to climb down. That's when he comes back over, clips her in the leg, climbs up the lattice to go after her. She winds up knocking his ass down. And at that point, that's where you really see the shift in power. From the moment, because before that, it's crazy when you think about it. Like, wow, this is an 80-minute movie, and we've kind of like jumped past a couple things. So through the window earlier, after he props Sarah up against the window and is knocking on it, she tags him with a hammer, gets him right in the forearm. It is gnarly. It is gnarly. And right there, that was the shock to his system. And from that point on, the hammer up to her getting the crossbow, we see the shift in power. And it's played out so well. And when you hear Kate Siegel talk about this role, talk about any role, she always brings up Ripley. She always brings up Ripley from the Alien franchise and says, she's like, I go into every role like Ripley. Motherly, badass, but always ready to pull my gun. Nice. And I'm like, oh, she is such a badass. It's so ridiculous.
Dude, she'd be an awesome Ripley if they like remade.
She'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
Absolutely. She could, I'm convinced she could play anything. She just gets from the first minute of this, she's great, and you're just enamored with her right up until the end. You just take this ride with her right to the end.
I gotta admit, guys, that there was this one part where I'm watching it and I'm like, wait, what the hell just happened? Like, Danny, you want to explain that to everyone?
Well, you mentioned it earlier that she's a writer, and she has this writer's brain that allows her to go through the endings of her book, and it's a voice in her head that like goes through the different endings of the book. So John has just been stabbed. Sarah's boyfriend has just been stabbed in the neck, and he's bleeding out. And she had been shot by the crossbow earlier in the leg, and she sees John being killed, and she figures, all right, I got to make a run for it. And she tries to make a run for it, limping very badly, and the killer runs up to her with a rock and boom, hits her in the head. And my first thought watching it is, oh, he knocks her out. He's going to drag her body inside and it's going to set up act 3. No, he pummels her head with this rock and kills her. And I paused it, and this is exactly 60 minutes into the movie. There are 20 minutes left, and you're thinking, blah, blah, blah. That's it?
Yeah.
And very cleverly, her dead body looks at you, and you hear the voice in her head. And it very, very, I love the way it does this, kind of breaking the fourth wall a little bit. And you understand that this is one of the endings that she sees in her writer's brain. While that ending is going on in her head, John was actually trying to kill the intruder, and then he eventually bleeds out and dies. And she realizes, I can't make a run for it. I've been shot by a crossbow in the leg. He'll find me and kill me.
Right.
It sets up the final act of the movie where she starts to go through the various endings, and it's very perfectly symmetrical to the beginning, because I think the book she was writing has like 6 or 7 potential endings.
Right.
And she literally runs through 6 or 7 potential endings for herself.
Right.
Can I run? No, he'll catch me. Can I shoot him with the crossbow? No, I can barely load the damn thing, and I've never shot it before. Can I sneak out and turn the power on? No, he'll hear me and slice my throat. Can I hide? He'll probably find you, but if he doesn't, you'll bleed to death. And she basically realizes there's only one ending to this confrontation. She's got to fight him and kill him, or die trying.
Her monologue is unreal too. Every word she says, it's like a firework going off in the distance. You're just like she's like, when she's like, we are running out of time. It's like, oh my God. And it's, when you think about it and you go through that scene, you're like, that was her telling herself that she is the final girl. Like, that's what that is.
That's right. That's right.
And like, I don't know how much more how much more respect you can treat this genre with.
This is the third Flanagan film that we've covered. All 3 of them have had like that clue moment where it's like the various endings that could take place now.
Right.
You know, it's an Absentia and an Oculus. And just like in Oculus and Absentia, there's also that, oh my God, did I just see that moment where, you know, you think one of the main characters, female protagonists, dies tragically, and you find out, thankfully, that this was just the clue moment, and, you know, let's see how it really ends.
In this movie, though, there's some hardcore hand damage.
I wrote in my notes, boy, Flanagan sure does like fucking up hands. So Maddie has her final girl moment. At that point, the killer is outside. The cat has now come back on the property. He's talking to the cat, and Maddie steps outside, clips him with the crossbow, and boom, we're now we're on a whole new level, right? So she manages to get herself back inside, loses one of the arrows, sticks her hand out to reach for it. He closes the sliding door on her hand. As if that's not bad enough, he just stomps it out. Brutality. Stomps this thing out. Her hand looks like a mangled tree branch. It's like, it looks like a semi drove through a tree. That's what her hand just looks like. And in the most badass moment ever, the two of them, it's not a split shot, but going back and forth, they both rise up against the glass. She sticks her finger in her crossbow leg wound and writes on the glass, "Do it, coward." Basically saying, come inside. And he says, "I'm coming in." And she says, and she writes, "Do it, coward." And you're like, what? Like, let's do this, It's so sick.
That to bring it back to Ripley, that's her get away from her, you bitch moment, you know?
You know, that scene kind of led to a scene that gave me goosebumps, where she then gets on her computer as he's preparing to break in. He gets a crowbar to break the glass, and she's typing up the details to her mom and her dad and her sister, like the details about the killer. He's got a tattoo on his neck. He's like this build. And, you know, she writes, died fighting. Having watched previous Flanagan films like Absentia and even Dr. Sleep and, you know, Oculus, I was like, okay, this might have a pretty tragic ending. This might end with the guy killing her. And so I didn't know which way it was going to go. And so he comes in, and it's basically a battle royale, right? Like, it's that kind of scene where you know that she's going to take damage. He's probably going to take damage too.
I actually listed the last notes that I have were a list of each of them, the wounds that each of them have. And it went on 3 lines each. So they really hacked the shit out of each other. When he finally gets in, it's another one of these great scenes where it's completely muted and she's hovering down in the bathroom and you just see the glass behind her falling, and you don't hear it, but you know what's happening. And I wrote down, it's a Silence of the Lambs moment, because he has her. Buffalo Bill stalking Clarice in the dark with the night vision, and it's and he's right behind her, and he could kill her in any minute. And it's that subtle. In Silence of the Lambs, it was the cocking of the gun that made the noise. Here, it's he has to have the last word, and he makes a one leg. Oh, he says, I bet if I try, I could find the spot to make you scream. Wow. And he says it, and he blows, and like his air brushes up, and you see her hair move, and she like does a John Wick move, avoids it, stabs him in the knee, and then that takes it out into the kitchen for the final moments of the battle.
Danny, why don't you just read that list of the damage they do to each other?
Well, she takes the crossbow to the leg, the mangled hand. She gets in that scene in the bathroom. She gets her shoulder sliced with a knife, and then she is literally nearly choked to death, to the point where her life is literally flashing before her eyes.
Yes, another fantastic sequence. Like that movie. So off the top of my head, I can think of at least 3 fantastic sequences. Her writing to her parents and her sister, her going through the outcomes of her escape, even back in the beginning of the movie when she's just thinking of the different plot points for her novel. That to me was a great scene. But then that sequence when he's choking her and she's having flashes of her life and they're just still photos. So good.
Flanagan has spoken that Jason Blum had reached out to him, years ago around this time about doing a Halloween film. And so people have asked him on podcasts, like, well, what would your Halloween film, what would it have been? And he's like, it would have been Hush. Huh. He's like, because to me, because I don't want to freeze it, he's like, Maddie is both Dr. Loomis and Laurie Strode. Huh. And I'm like, oh my God, that's absolutely right. Like,
there are so many very obvious, like, not even references, but just like homages in a way to Halloween, like the mask being pale at the beginning, the robotic nature of his walk, the fact that, like, he never in this movie, the only time I think you see him run in this movie is when he quote unquote kills her in her vision of what might happen if she tries to run. Like, we've seen home invasion movies before. Yeah. This movie is a lot more like Halloween than it is The Strangers or even Your Neck. This movie is a lot more traditional slasher movie than it is a home invasion movie.
I think The Strangers is terrific, but I'll be damned if I ever have the desire to ever see it again. Because as good as it is, it's not enjoyable. Like, this is better than Hush is better than your average slasher, yet more approachable than your average home invasion film. What people were saying before about that last line she types, died fighting. I had this weird feeling at that time where I'm like, I would have been okay with her dying because I knew at that moment she was going to go out like a total boss. But she doesn't, because they start bawling. And that's when you see the Hornet, the can of Hornet spray that was left on the ground. You see the corkscrew that was left on the ground. You see the fire alarm, and all these items get used in that final battle.
Corkscrew was on the bookshelf in the like almost opening scene of the movie. You see the bookshelf where she puts Midnight Mass down. You see the Stephen King books and some James Patterson books there. Yep. And then the picture of her and her sister, and in front of the picture of her and her sister is the goddamn corkscrew. Like Chris, you just said, the ending of this movie, I thought you were going to say something different, because I was even thinking maybe she does die, and that the ending of this movie is just one of her endings where she won, you know, and maybe he does. There's if the movie would have faded to black after she wrote the words died fighting, I would have been fine with it.
Yes.
Oh, me too. Oh, hell yeah, absolutely.
And why, like you said, this movie was better off on Netflix than it was the theater, because I could only imagine like people would have thrown crap at the screen if they left this anything ambiguous. And there's not an ambiguous ending. She wins.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. But I mean, listen, you can't argue with the satisfaction of watching her plunge that corkscrew into his neck, and then she goes out, and just the relief, the wave of relief that washes over her when you see those lights, those police lights coming down the road. Even as a viewer, you're like, oh, you so deserve this right now. Like, you deserve nothing less than this right now.
Yep.
To have it after the night you've just had.
Yeah, this movie just gets at that, like, the most, like, natural fears that people have. Like, being alone. Like, something weird going on in your house. Like, you know, like, how many times have the three of us, you know, we're horror movie fans, so we're sitting up, it's after midnight, everyone else in the house is sleeping, and you hear a noise, and you're like, well, that's it.
Yep. I'm dead.
This movie gets to those raw emotions that we all have, like those most basic fears, and then it's amplified because she's deaf, and we love her so much, and we only really got to know her for that opening 10 minutes.
Yep.
And that just goes to the two of them, Kate Siegel, of course, and Mike Flanagan, and how effective the script is. And it really shows you, you know, like, when you're writing a script, a lot of times you think, oh, if you're writing a script, it's all dialogue. And again, you know, so much of this script is just looks, the way characters are looking, the emotion on their face.
This movie is so goddamn lean and mean. It is just, there is not an ounce of fat on this thing.
Nope.
This, for me, is one of the best slasher films since Scream. Watching this again, this movie, it surprised me, because I'm like, this is going to sit a lot higher in my ranking than I would have. Like, I feel like rewatching all his films and doing this, and the three of us really hashing it out and hearing each other's opinions, I feel like my ranking is going to change every time.
So Flanagan hit it out of the park, like hashtag baseball boy.
He threw it in there. He snuck it in there. So I've seen 4 Flanagan films now at this point. Dr. Sleep, Oculus, Absentia, and this, Hush, right? And of course, I've seen Hill House, but that's another thing. My ranking as of this movie now goes Dr. Sleep, then this, then Absentia, and then Oculus. So this is my number 2 Flanagan film. And I think it's because it was like legitimately tense and scary, and there was nothing extra to it. Like you just said, Chris, like it's just lean, and yet it has these great moments, like the 3 moments I said before, plus plus the tension with John when he shows up, and just the killer's personality too. I just, yeah, I loved it. Yeah, it's number 2 for me.
Dr. Sleep is number 1. And then, like, again, like, we go through this problem all the time. It's like Chris said, your rankings switch all the time. Like, I think this is I think I have this around number 3. I go back and forth. This, Ouija 2, I go back and forth with Gerald's Game, this, and Ouija 2 for my number 2 slot. So it's on any given day, this is number 2, 3, or 4. Today it'll be number 2 because I just rewatched it twice and it's just so freaking well done. I totally agree with what Chris said. The only other slasher movie I can think of, like in the like true slasher movie that I can think of that would go up with this since Scream would be Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon.
100%, absolutely. As far as my ranking goes, you know, everyone has their favorite subgenre of horror. Mine has always been supernatural, with slasher like either neck and neck or directly behind it. And really that's, you know, Flanagan dabbles more in the supernatural.
Yes.
I'd have to go, and again, it could change, but I'm probably gonna put it in my 3rd right now. I'm gonna put Dr. Sleep at 1. I'm going to put Gerald's Game at 2, and I'm going to put Hush in my 3rd right now. And it's without thinking about it. I can't think about it too much. And again, like we've said before, it's like if you're forcing me to do this right now, then Hush is my 3rd because again, last week with not having seen it in a while, it maybe would have been below Oculus and Ouija.
Yeah.
But it's, you know, it's excellent. Like it's so, I mean, 80 minutes, not a moment is wasted.
Yes. Excellent.
You know, we brought up Ripley a few times. Like, this isn't the first time, and it's not the last time that Flanagan has had just absolutely phenomenal roles for women in his movies. It just so happens that Kate Siegel is his wife and co-wrote this movie, but she is phenomenal in this movie. But like, obviously Karen Gillan in Oculus, Rebecca, what is it? Not Rebecca Hall. What's it? Who's Ferguson? Rose, and girl who played Abra, the young girl in Dr. Sleep, phenomenal. One of the best child performances I've ever seen.
Yeah.
It just, if you want to see like kick-ass women in movies, Mike Flanagan is usually a director you go to.
We're moving away from Flanagan territory for now, but because of our discussions, I really want to eventually watch Ouija 2, and I want to watch Gerald's Game as well, and we can discuss it on this show. And then I also, now that you guys are bringing this up, I want to watch Behind the Mask. For the next episode, we're actually going to kind of go do something new. We're going to watch One BR or One Bedroom, right? And then I think we'll eventually get to Pale Door and to In Search of Darkness. All right. Well, thanks so much, guys. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks.